Welcome back to Steel City Sports. So today is part 2 of our series where we're reacting to the NFLPA's grading of each NFL coach from the past season. So like I said in part 1, I don't know exactly what that means. Is it players ranking the guys? Is it people who work for the Players Association grading them? I don't really know. You guys will have to let me know. But it's a provocative thing to look at. I think some of the grades are fun to look at, and I definitely had some massive disagreements in part 1. If you didn't see part 1, I definitely think you should check it out. There will be a link in the description. And if you're new to the channel, definitely subscribe because we got a lot of stuff in the NFL community coming up in the next couple weeks. We got free agency, we got the draft, we're gonna see who gets franchise tagged, and we're also gonna see who gets cut. So we got a lot. We're gonna be covering that all on the channel. So if you're new, definitely hit the subscribe button. But today we're gonna be doing part 2 of our reaction. So let's start off with Doug Peterson. So I was actually shocked at how many coaches in the NFL got an A. Because they're saying half the coaches in the NFL at worst are an A-. And for me, in my head, when you're like an A-level coach, that's like top 10. And obviously you can't have 16 guys in the top 10. So I definitely think they overrated a lot of people, as we're going to talk about here. Doug Peterson is kind of a weird one because this year for Jacksonville in general was such a strange, bizarre situation. The fact that they started off the year 8-3 and then finished off the year 9-8 and missed the playoffs. A massive disappointment. And I don't really know exactly who's at fault. Trevor Lawrence definitely didn't take another step. I don't know how much of the blame belongs on Doug Peterson. It's just one of the more bizarre situations. Not really talked about as much because Philadelphia probably had the biggest self-implosion this year, but definitely concerning. A- I think is warranted. I used to think really, really highly of Doug Peterson. I legit thought he was a top 5 head coach in the NFL for a while. I don't think I quite think of him that high now, but he does have a Super Bowl. He beat Bill Belichick in a Super Bowl. His first year in Jacksonville, I thought was massively impressive just because you look at the mess that Urban Meyer did there. Urban Meyer was so bad that could have just destroyed not only Trevor Lawrence, but the franchise. And the fact that they went out there, brought an adult in with Doug Peterson, in my opinion, I thought it changed the franchise. But year 2 for Doug was not good. So A- I think is fair. However, I don't think I think I have a higher opinion of what an A- is than the NFLPA because a lot of these guys I don't know. The next one would be Brian Daboll as an A-. So another weird case because his first year as the Giants head coach, I would have told you he's an A+ home run, one of the best coaches in the league. Year 2 was really ugly, not only because the team sucked, but also from a locker room standpoint, the assistant coaches hated him, especially Wink Martindale, who's no longer with the Giants. And it was just reported to be a very toxic work environment. Brian Daboll, there were reports that he's very two-faced. He'd say one thing to his assistant coaches and then a complete opposite thing to his players. So I don't know what to make of it. Obviously, I'm not in the building. All I can tell you is what I saw on the football field, and that's that they were bad this year. And I think that really goes back to the fact that they have the worst contract in the NFL on their team. That's Daniel Jones making $40 million annually. I think the crown jewel of Brian Daboll's career, no matter what happens with the Giants, let's say they suck again and he gets fired, the thing that he's always going to be able to say is, I got Daniel Jones a $40 million annual contract. That is so mind-boggling. That's absurd. That contract was given out, and it's because Brian Daboll made Daniel Jones look like a slightly above average QB. So no matter what happens, I think that's always going to be something to hang on his mantle that he did that. So like I said, year 1 would have given an A+. This year, probably would have given him a C to C-. So I think it averages out. I'd probably put him at a B as of right now. Next year's obviously a massive year. He could be someone who's gone really quick, which is crazy because they got off to such a great start. They were so ahead of schedule his first year there. Next is Sean Payton as an A-, who I feel is usually regarded in the NFL as one of the best. I've been saying this basically ever since I've started watching the NFL, and I think Sean Payton is one of the most overrated head coaches in the NFL. Not that he's bad, But I have consistently seen Sean Payton ranked as one of the best head coaches in the league, especially since he's gotten back. I'm gonna give him credit for what he attempted to do with Russ. He definitely cleaned Russell Wilson up a little bit after the disastrous year with Nathaniel Hackett. But overall, Sean Payton has had a lot of talent. You look back to those Saints teams like 2017, 18, 19, 2020, where they just had Pro Bowlers in every unit. It's just a flat-out stacked team and just nothing to really show for it. And I get it, he won a ring. But the era in which he won that Super Bowl championship, the game of football is not the same game. It's a completely different sport than it was when he won that ring. So, yeah, he has that on his resume. But in terms of in 2024, I think he's a good I'd probably put him at a B+, a B to B+. He's a good head coach. He's definitely above average, but I don't think he's one of the greatest in the league right now. Definitely not. Here's one that really, really shocked me. That's Jonathan Gannon as an A-, because why? What did they see this year to make you believe he's an A-? I think he was an awesome coordinator. He was a big reason why the Eagles looked so good and made it to the Super Bowl in 2022. But as a head coach, we have 1 year, and they won 4 or 5 games this year. I get Kyler was out a lot, but this team needs a lot of work, and I just don't know what did they see from Gannon this year that would warrant an A- grade. I think a C would be at the highest I could put it at right now, because we just know really nothing about him. When he gets a real team, when they start to build up an actual roster in Arizona, maybe this grade will be warranted. But as of now, I've seen nothing to indicate that he's an A-level head coach. Pete Carroll, who's obviously since been fired from Seattle, got an A-, I think is pretty appropriate. I think he's a really good motivator at this point in his career. However, from an X's and O's standpoint, I think that's the reason why Seattle moved on. They're like, hey, Pete, you're a defensive guy. We got defensive players on this team, yet our defense sucks, so you got to go. So I like him a lot from a motivational and a leadership standpoint, but in terms of X's and O's, I think Pete is definitely started to become outdated. That's why Seattle got him out of there. A-, I guess, is fine. I'd probably put him a little lower, though, a B+ to B. There's a reason why no other teams hired him. Jonathan Gannon, or no, we did him, sorry. Kyle Shanahan, this is a shocking one, that he's only an A-, because even though he lost the Super Bowl, and even though it's now a true narrative that he blows big games, this is the 3rd time he's blown a Super Bowl as either the offensive coordinator in Atlanta, where he just wouldn't run the ball to chew the clock up, or 2 times now with the Niners, where they've had a lead in the 4th quarter and end up blowing it. There's definitely a real narrative of him not knowing how to manage games lately and kind of panicking. But I still would put him as an A+. I was calling him for about a year or two the best coach in the NFL. I'm not going to do that anymore after he lost to Reed in the Super Bowl. I think it would be it would be very nonsensical to do that. And I had people still pissed at me, even back when I did call him the best coach. The reason why I did do that, though, is because look at the quarterback play that he's had and the amount of sustained success he's had in San Francisco with backup-level quarterbacks. Let's face it, Jimmy Garoppolo was a backup-level quarterback, but in Kyle Shanahan's system became a guy who led them to the Super Bowl. And same thing with Brock Purdy. Everyone wants to debate Brock Purdy's talent, but he was Mr. Irrelevant for a reason. If he goes to 31 other teams in the NFL, I don't think you're going to be hearing about Purdy as much as you have. I think he's the perfect player for Shanahan's system, and Shanahan's ability to elevate quarterbacks, his knowledge of today's style of offense, his ability to draw up run schemes, I think he should be an A+. Even though he can't finish off the big game, you cannot deny that the Niners have been a juggernaut and a powerhouse ever since he's gotten there. Next is my coach, Mike Tomlin, at an A. I don't want to spend too much time on Tomlin because as a Steelers fan, I could probably do a 20-minute video on Tomlin alone because I have such mixed opinions on him since he's my coach. There are parts of Tomlin that I really do appreciate. I think he's really good from a motivational leadership standpoint. On the other side, it feels like some of the priorities with the Steelers aren't right in terms of it feels like we prioritize the winning season record a lot more than we prioritize actually winning, which kind of means we're settling for mediocrity, in my opinion. But I also think a lot of Steelers fans are just spoiled brats whenever they're talking about Tomlin because there's at least 15 teams in the NFL that would sign up for what we've had in the Tomlin era. You know, he won a Super Bowl similar to Peyton. It was a while ago, but we've never been like a shit show. Like, we've been very, very well run in the Tomlin era. We're always like in the hunt to make playoffs. We're always like one of the consistent better teams in the NFL. So I think an A is probably a little higher than where I would put him. I'd probably put him more like an A minus B plus level. And he's also, I got to give him a bad mark on this too. Is probably the worst thing he is at being a head coach. The worst attribute to Mike Tomlin is building coaching staffs. He's terrible at that. He's not good at hiring coordinators, and he should never again be the guy who hires the coordinators, because he's never had a good offensive or defensive coordinator since he's taken over. Well, he has had a couple, but he usually runs them out of town. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on Tomlin. If you guys would like to hear me as a diehard Steelers fan do a video on Tomlin himself, I'd be more than happy to do that. Let me know in the comments if that's something you guys would like to see. Nick Sirianni at an A is shocking to me, because I don't think Nick Sirianni is a very, very good head coach. I know he got to a Super Bowl, but he had one of the best coaching staffs in the league, and he had player for player arguably the best roster in the league that year. And I just don't know what Nick Sirianni really provides to a team. Like, he doesn't call the defensive plays. He doesn't call the offensive plays. And from a motivational standpoint, I think he's kind of a goofball. I think he's like a glorified cheerleader. So I don't really get, from a football standpoint, what Nick Sirianni provides to the Philadelphia Eagles. That's why I was like, this offseason, like, there's a guy named Bill Belichick sitting on the open market. Like, fire Sirianni and go get that guy. I think in a heartbeat, Philadelphia would, if they could get a redo on the Steichen thing, like fire Sirianni to keep Shane Steichen, make him the head coach, they'd do that in a heartbeat, because you look at how different Jalen Hurts looked. Now, I get it. Brian Johnson, their OC this year, was kind of an incompetent mess. They brought in Kellen Moore now this year, who I think his stock's trending down, had kind of an underwhelming year with the Chargers after being praised as like a genius with Dallas. So I don't know. There's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of uncertainty, not only with Sirianni, but with the Philadelphia Eagles organization as a whole. But I will say overall, I think A is way too high. Even if you're like a big fan of Sirianni, like, I still think an A is way, way supremely high. Like, especially when you're not calling plays on defense or offense side. I'd say best case scenario, like a B, a solid B, but I would probably rank him even lower than that, like a B minus, because I don't know what he brings to the table, honestly. Next is Mike McDaniel at an A. I think is definitely deserving, so I think that's a perfect grade for Mike McDaniel. I think he's the perfect quintessential modern-day head coach. Like, if you're starting your franchise in a vacuum, he would probably go in the top 5 just because of his knowledge of offensive scheme. His personality is a little weird. That definitely is not my cup of tea, because he's just a straight-up goofball, which I don't really care, but I really like my coaches to be more CEO, more business style. That's just my thing. I think Mike McDaniel definitely comes off as a goofball, but you can't question his knowledge of the offensive side of the football. He's an offensive mastermind, an offensive genius. You look at how productive the offense has been since he's gotten there. Like, Tua's looked incredible. Tyreek and Waddle and the running backs, like, I think they are one of the best well-run offenses in the league. They definitely have to start getting a playoff win in here eventually, but through his first 2 years, I think you can't deny his genius on the offensive side of the ball. I think A is definitely fair. Sean McVay as an A, though, is kind of weird, because I think he's one of the easiest no-brainer A-pluses in the NFL. And I think now that Shanahan's kind of gone down in my rankings, now that, like, it's a real thing, he blows the big games, I think, honestly, Sean McVay might be my number 2 head coach in the NFL behind Reid, honestly. I think McVay, in a vacuum, if I'm just starting a team, McVay would probably be my second pick behind Reid. Like, I'm shocked he's not an A+. You take all the offensive praise I just gave to Mike McDaniel, up that a couple notches, and apply that to Sean McVay. Just an offensive genius. And even on top of the Super Bowl and building that incredible team, just this year alone, I think, was massively impressive for the way that he was able to completely rebuild the offense, rebuild the O-line. Puka Nacua as a rookie, like, acknowledging him and putting him in the offense, and Kyron Williams as a second-year guy just went insane. And his ability to play off or coach off Stafford is immaculate. So I'm shocked he's not an A plus. Mike McCarthy is an A. I think it's a complete joke. I think Mike McCarthy's a good offensive play caller, but as a head coach, we all know the reason he's the Dallas head coach is because he's not going to take away from Jerry's spotlight. That's the only reason Mike's there. His entire tenure as the Dallas Cowboys head coach, they've been awesome in the regular season, and they just flat out suck in the playoffs. And it's clear. Like that's a clear thing you can point to. His time management, his clock management in big games is terrible. It's costed them big games in the playoffs. And losing this year in the first round to a 7-seeded team, especially a team that was his former team that fired him, like how was he not fired this year? Especially, like I said again, with Belichick out there. I know he would probably take away from Jerry, but McCarthy, I don't know how he has a job in 2024, especially as a head coach. Like as an offensive coordinator, I'd be fine with that. But as a head coach, I don't get it. I think there's only one team in the NFL that would have him as a head coach, and that's Dallas, because he's not going to take the spotlight away from Jerry Jones. I'd put him at like a B to B minus, honestly. Next is Zach Taylor at an A. I guess it probably is a little high for me just because we're kind of uncertain on him. Like, I think he's good. He's definitely above average, but it obviously helps when you got Joe Burrow at the quarterback position. Like, he definitely Jake Browning looked pretty good this year, even when Burrow was gone, so that's a good argument for Zach Taylor. You know, he's been to a Super Bowl as a head coach. So I can get the arguments for A. I just think for me, it's a little too high. I'd probably put him at like a A-, B+ level guy, Sean McDermott at an A, I think is way too high for Sean McDermott. Not that he's bad. I think he's a good head coach, but I don't think the Buffalo Bills are ever going to win a Super Bowl with him as the head coach. I honestly think it's time to move off of Sean McDermott. And I said this even back earlier in the season when they were 6-6. Like, my comparison to this is like for the Golden State Warriors back when they were bad, when they got Steph and that. Like, they had Mark Jackson, who was phenomenal at building up their team, developing the players, like building the culture of a winning culture. But when it was time to start winning and competing for championships in Golden State, they got Mark Jackson out of there. They brought in a win-now guy with Steve Kerr. I think that's the missing piece for the Bills. They need to move on from their Mark Jackson, their Sean McDermott, the guy that developed them and built up the team, and go to a win-now guy, a guy that fits the team a lot better, and that would be an offensive-minded guy who can bounce off Josh Allen. Josh Allen's best statistical years are when he had Brian Daboll, an elite-level offensive mind. So I know that's kind of a hot take because the Bills have been a really good team whenever he's been there, but I just think he's kind of the weak link. I think the skill set he provides to a team, what he brings to the table, is no longer what the Buffalo Bills need. Then we have there's only 3 A+, and I'm kind of shocked by 2 of them. Kevin O'Connell, I think, is an awesome head coach. I'm just kind of surprised that he was rated as an A+. I don't really have a strong argument to not put him in A+. I guess for me, if I'm putting you at an A+, you probably need more playoff success. Like, he's only been a head coach for 2 years now, but in those 2 years has been awesome. Like, his first year, they won 11 or 12 games, and they got to the playoffs. And then this year, even with their injuries to really key guys like Kirk and Justin Jefferson, they still stayed afloat and were still a competitive team. So I like him a lot. I think he's great. Definitely, I would think he's close, if not in the top 10 for head coaches. But if you're at an A+, I think you need a little more sustained playoff success to make it into that tier. Same goes with Dan Campbell, who I think is awesome. He has a little bit more of an argument because he's been to an NFC championship game. And I think he probably should have won Coach of the Year this year. You know, like, I did do a video back in December about how I think Stefanski should win it. But looking back on it now, just for the fact that he did that with the Lions, like, it's impressive enough to get to the NFC championship game. But to do that with the Detroit Lions, who have been one of the worst franchises, not only in football, but in professional American sports over the past decades, to do that with that team, I think is wildly impressive. We're still, we don't know if he's, the best X's and O's guys because he has Ben Johnson, but from a motivational standpoint, I think he's second to none. I think he's the best motivational coach in the entire league. And then, of course, last is Andy Reid at an A+. Don't really need to spend much time there. 3-time Super Bowl champion. I won't say like I've been a hater of him, but I just pushed back on him in like the GOAT conversations because didn't really do much before he had Mahomes. Like he did reach a Super Bowl, but he had a loaded team in Philly. So it drives me kind of nuts whenever people talk about him in the GOAT conversation. I still think Belichick is pretty far ahead of Andy Reid, but in today's NFL, he's the perfect guy you want for the NFL in today because all the roles are slanted to the offensive side of the ball. That just 100% benefits Andy Reid and his philosophy, his style. So that has been my reaction to the NFLPA's grading of each coach. Make sure you let me know your team, like in specific. Let me know your coach's grade and if you agree with it, what you'd change. If you made it this far, appreciate you listening. Please like and subscribe.